Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reviewing the Boxer family of vehicles in War Thunder, specifically the two that are currently in the game, the Boxer MGS and the Boxer Vilkas. Now the reason why I'm kind of reviewing both of these at the same time is because if you're familiar with the Boxer family of vehicles, it's essentially a drive section with a bunch of mission modules that are placed on top of the drive section. So for all practical purposes, the drive section is effectively identical on all vehicles, and to an extent the armor is as well. So there are a lot of similarities across the Boxer family, basically regardless of what purpose they'll fill in. This does also bring up some interesting points that are relevant to the game of War Thunder, because since the drive section is effectively identical across all variants, you have to have essentially a completely autonomous drive section and then an almost equally autonomous mission module to place and bolt on top of it. And what this means is that the vehicles tend to be larger and heavier than contemporary vehicles of the same type, and they are also incredibly tall. To give you an idea of exactly how big the Boxer is, you can see in the video in the background we're on the A flag in factory, and these walls that most tanks can't really see over, or at least can't see over all that well, the Boxer's turret fully clears and we can see it basically all the way into the enemy spawn. Now as far as the basics, the two vehicles we're reviewing, the Vilkas and the MGS, are both light tanks for Germany at rank 7, and they're both event vehicles. As light tanks, they have access to active scouting, artillery strikes, and of course they are rank 7, so they have a drone with thermal imaging you can use to scout out enemy positions and mark them on the map for your team. Both vehicles have high quality thermal imaging in both the commander sight and the gunner sight, and this also brings us to one of the interesting differences. The Vilkas commander sight is actually relatively small and is not that high above the turret, whereas the MGS's thermal vision is actually mounted higher up on the vehicle and has a nicer FOV, so the MGS definitely has an advantage in terms of peaking the commander sight over hills. On top of that, both vehicles have access to stabilizers and laser rangefinders, although those are pretty standard for this battle rating. The MGS also has access to a laser warning receiver, so when you are getting lased, you will get a warning and you will get a direction where that laser is coming from, so you can potentially react, especially if it's something slower moving like a helicopter fired missile. Smoke grenades are of course standard as well, and not really remarkable on either of these two platforms. In the area of soft stats, I would say the point goes to the Boxer MGS because unlike the Boxer Vilkas, it does have access to a very nice thermal imaging system for the commander and also a laser warning receiver, which does give it a slight edge, although it's not huge. Going into mobility, both vehicles have the exact same engine and transmission as you would expect since they're using the same basic drive section. The overall forward speed caps at over 100 kph, however this is not really attainable on most maps. Realistically, you're probably going to cruise at closer to 60 to 70. If you get a nice stretch of road, you can even hit 80 or 90. The reverse speed for both vehicles caps at only around 18 kph, and 18 is pretty low. In fact, it's below the threshold of what I would consider a super usable reverse gear, and all it's really good for is just quickly backing you up out of a bad situation. You can't really use it as a substitute for your forward gears like you can if you have in the mid to high 30s. Now anyone who has played wheeled vehicles before will understand that wheeled vehicles are very awkward to deal with in close quarters situations, especially on urban maps, and the Boxers are no exception. In fact, they're a little worse because of how awkwardly long they are. Additionally, they only have front wheel steering, so it's not even as responsive as some other vehicles, and obviously they don't have neutral steering like a vehicle like the AMX 10RC does. Additionally, as I kind of highlighted in the intro, these are both pretty heavy for wheeled vehicles at 30 to 38 tons each, and the only vehicle that really outclasses them is the Class 3P weighing in at 40 tons. Additionally, this is where the difference between the mission modules starts to step in, because obviously the mission modules do have a pretty significant difference in weight, about 5 tons across the two vehicles, with the MGS being noticeably more sluggish, especially on soft ground or hills. And all things considered, I would broadly characterize the Boxer's mobility as acceptable. For a wheeled light vehicle, they aren't particularly exceptional, but if you just need to go fast in a straight line, they can do the job reasonably well. However, the Vilkas pretty easily beats the MGS here by being about 5 tons lighter, making it the clear winner for this round. In terms of armor as wheeled light vehicles, you wouldn't really expect much, and that's about what you get. Even though the upper front plate does have some slope, it's nowhere near enough of a slope to block anything more serious than a basic autocannon round. That being said, it is at least a fully enclosed armored vehicle, so at least you should be basically immune to overpressure outside of some powerful high explosive rounds, right? Well, okay, I guess you can be overpressured, but at least with artillery strikes coming in, the artillery strike can't just hit near you, it has to hit you directly, right? Well, okay, I guess it can't take explosive hits basically at all, but at least you can't be heavy machine gunned from the side. I mean, right? Okay, well in that last clip, I'm going to gloss over the fact that somehow we hit the lower plate of that T-72 and only got the driver and engine, because it's not like there's anything between the driver and engine like ammo or other crew that could have knocked the vehicle out. I mean, that would just be crazy. But that aside, that was really the only instance I had in either the Boxer or Vilkas of getting killed by a heavy machine gun. The overpressure hits were kind of weird, and I only really got them on the Boxer. I didn't get them on the Vilkas, so I suspect there might actually be a small issue with its damage model, especially on the back end of it, but that's just a hunch. That being said, while it may on the surface seem like both the Vilkas and the MGS have similar survivability, there's actually some pretty noticeable differences when you look at their X-ray, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't make as much sense. So we'll start with the Vilkas, and obviously the Vilkas is an infantry fighting vehicle, so it has a bunch of room in the back that isn't really used because that's reserved for infantry. The only ammo you really have in the vehicle is an ammo cache under the commander and the gunner stations, and also a pair of spike missiles, although I rarely found these getting hit. Additionally, the 30mm ammo in the turret doesn't appear to have blow-up panels, so a hit there will take you out. However, a hit to the spikes really just seems to cook off the spikes and doesn't do any meaningful damage to the vehicle. Combine that with the fact that the Vilkas has a completely unmanned turret, and the Vilkas can quite often eat shots to the turret without any serious damage other than losing the ability to return fire, so if you are in a concealed position at long range, it can be pretty annoying to get rid of. On top of that, if you are using its speed to drive very quickly and present your opponent with a broadside target, if they shoot too far out in front of you, they just knock out the engine and driver. If they shoot too far in the back, they hit basically nothing, so the Vilkas isn't exactly survivable in any consistent means, but does at least take hits from time to time. The same, however, cannot be said of the MGS, specifically because of the MGS's turret. The MGS's turret uses a 12-round autoloader in the back of the bustle, and while you think this would have something like blowout panels, it absolutely does not. And what this in practice means is that any hits to the turret face, left or right, is probably going to go through the turret face, through the gunner/commander, and straight into the bustle and knock out your ammo. From a practical standpoint, this basically means the MGS is nowhere near as good hold down as the Vilkas, since the MGS can simply be killed through its turret far more easily and more consistently. To top it off, the turret is also crewed by two individuals who are sitting closer to the center of the vehicle, so this also leaves more area for crew knockouts, and additionally, because the bustle autoloader only has 12 rounds, if you want more than 13 rounds total, you're going to have to fill out the ammo racks in the back of the vehicle, so this means that unlike the Vilkas, where if the enemy shoots too far back they hit nothing, in the MGS if the enemy shoots too far back they often hit ammo or crew. The MGS also has one other large and rather unusual feature, in that it has a very prominent turret basket that apparently is also the horizontal drive, so if any hit goes through anywhere near the middle of the vehicle, this is probably going to eat enough shrapnel to completely lose your gun's ability to traverse. Now personally, I'm not familiar enough with the way these MGS turrets are manufactured to know if this is accurate, but it does seem a little weird for a turret basket hit to completely knock out the ability of the entire turret to traverse, as that doesn't usually work that way. With all that being said, this round easily goes to the Vilkas. While neither vehicle is particularly good at taking hits, the MGS I noticed was particularly bad at it, even compared to its sister, the Vilkas. And now we're on to the most noticeable aspect, the firepower. Both vehicles feature a coaxial machine gun, so we're not really going to mention that too much, but it is at least there. The Vilkas features a 30mm autocannon with a relatively modest rate of fire. It has access to both an APDS round and a high explosive round, although I suspect most players are just going to stick with the APFSDS round, since that does generally have the best ballistic performance, and your rate of fire is good enough that you don't really need to switch through ammo types in most instances. The Vilkas also features an auto tracker to shoot at both planes and helicopters, and additionally the Spike LR2s are actually pretty decent at hitting helicopters within about 3 to 4 kilometers. On the whole, if you are familiar with the other German IFV around this battle rating, the Puma, the gun on the Vilkas does broadly perform pretty similarly, although the Vilkas does noticeably lack the ahead rounds. The Vilkas also prominently comes with the Spike LR2s, and the Spike LR2s come in a launcher of 2 missiles, and you have 1 reload for it, for a total of 4 missiles. These are fire and forget missiles, and importantly they are angled slightly upwards, so they do have a minimum range of a few hundred meters, so you can't use them at super close distances. While the spikes are powerful enough to kill everything, they are somewhat inconsistent in terms of their ability to track, hit, and damage targets. That being said, fire and forget does give them a noticeable advantage in that you can simply peek, fire them, and then drop back. One big aspect of the Vilkas' turret is that it actually has a depression of minus 20 degrees for the 30mm cannon, which really allows it to use hull down in elevated positions incredibly well, and really incentivizes you taking advantage of that unmanned turret. That being said, the MGS is certainly no slouch in the firepower category. It has an auto-loaded 105mm cannon. The 105 on the MGS features both a heat and HESH round that, while capable and usable in certain scenarios, are not the most impressive. They're mostly just secondary rounds. Your primary round will be the top APFSDS round, DM63, which has a maximum penetration of 430mm. And this is enough to take out basically any tank in the game at any distance, assuming you know where to aim. Of course, the autoloader with the 5-second reload does allow for very rapid follow-up shots if your first shot doesn't completely destroy the enemy, and it also allows for dealing with opponents in rapid succession. So on the whole, this is a fairly capable gun that will work all the way up to the highest echelons of the game. It also features a fairly substantial 10 degrees of gun depression, which is really nice. In fact, the gun depression on both of these vehicles is somewhat mandatory because it turns out these vehicles are insanely tall, and at close range they can often struggle to hit targets. For this round, I'm ultimately going to have to call it a bit of a draw. It turns out it really just comes down to what situation you're in as to which of these two guns is better. If you're in an urban environment and you have a flank and you need to just take out enemies incredibly fast, the Vilkas' fast-firing autocannon is probably for the best, and there are some situations where its fire and forget missiles are superior as well. However, in other scenarios where you simply have long-range shots and you need to land it, the MGS is probably going to be the better pick. Some hypothetical scenario came up where the developers gave the players a chance to choose one of the two vehicles, or alternatively, if you see both of them on the market and want to pick one up for your German lineup, the question is, which one do I think you should pick? While the Vilkas certainly has some applications over the tech tree Pumas, it's more of a side grade than an upgrade, as the Pumas generally feature more durability, better close quarters maneuverability, and they also feature the ahead rounds in addition to a laser warning receiver. The MGS, however, has more of a well-defined niche because the tech tree vehicles that compete with it are actually noticeably worse in several key areas. The TAM-2C has basically the same shell, thermals, etc. However, the TAM-2C has very modest mobility for a light tank and a very slow reload. The Rod Kampfwagen 90 is actually a pretty good vehicle in terms of its mobility and generally has better survivability than the Boxers. However, the Rod Kampfwagen has a slow reload, no thermal imaging, which can make it a little awkward on top of having a slightly weaker top round. So on the whole, the MGS does offer more advantages over its tech tree counterparts, so if you had to go for one, I would probably go for the MGS. And the winner is, well, it's a bit of a draw. Both the vehicles are pretty even in that they can both fill their own role pretty well and are similar enough in most other areas that they don't really stand out among each other. On the whole, I would generally say the Boxers are pretty enjoyable vehicles to play because wheeled light vehicles, obviously because of their high top speed, tend to always be pretty enjoyable just to bomb around the map in, and especially if they have faster firing guns, you can really take advantage of a good flank. They really are vehicles that reward good map knowledge and good situational awareness, even if their poor close quarters maneuverability does sometimes get them into trouble. Of course, that's just my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree, if you like the Boxers or if you don't like them. I always love to hear it. If you enjoyed the video and you found it entertaining, a like and subscribe always helps out the channel. As always, danke bitte, tschüss.